afternoon. We'll go ahead and get things started and just kind of quickly review the House Bill 3 requirements and an overview of the survey before we dive into Q&A. I see we've already gotten a question on the PowerPoint being available, and Cody will go ahead and drop that into the chat. So you'll have it as a reference. We're also going to record this webinar and hope to post it on our HB3 site here later this week if possible, just so you all have it as a reference as well. Cody, could you go to the next slide? So as I'm sure you all are aware, House Bill 3 had this requirement that any district that saw a gain in their entitlement from 1819 and 1920 needed to provide teachers, librarians, nurses, and counselors with a compensation increase, and then compensation increases for other categories as well, except administrators was also a part of that. So TEA posted back last summer an HB3 and 30 video that outlined the details of this requirement, and also sent out a TAA. So if there are any questions as it pertains to the 30% compensation increase requirement generally, we would recommend you guys take another look at those two resources as they go into much more detail on that. So we're going to spend our time today talking about the reporting requirement that was associated with this. So essentially, here's the language from House Bill 3 that LEAs need to report to the legislature on these wage increases. TEA is offering to assist with that requirement, and mostly we're doing so by the survey that hopefully you all received a week and a half ago, with information that we are asking that you input into there pertaining to the budgetary information that you used in making these determinations. So as an aside, any district that does not want to use this avenue does not have to. We're really just trying to streamline the process and make things as easy for you all as possible. But if you wish to report it on your own, you're more than welcome to, and we would just ask that you can email us at hb3info@tea.texas.gov, and we can share the specific email addresses that you would send that report to if you're doing it on your own. And so I think the next slide just outlines really briefly overview of this timeline. The important date at this point being Friday, October 9th is when we're asking for districts to turn in this report to TEA so that we can then compile it and submit it to the legislature before the December 1st due date. And so I'll kick it over to Cody to kind of walk through a high-level overview of the survey itself.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm going to give you guys kind of just a quick high-level overview of what the survey is, and then the rest of the time is just going to be an open floor Q&A for you guys to ask whatever questions you're coming in with. So real high level here, there's 4 main tabs that are on the survey itself. The first is the general info tab, which is where you're actually putting in the calculation of that 30%. The next one is the gains by role ID. So this is that meeting the reporting requirement by position. And then the third is the teacher salary schedule, which is meeting the requirement of you showing differentiated compensation for your veteran teachers. And then the final page is just the automated report page of the information that you've provided on those 3 previous tabs. So starting with the first one, general info tab. This is again where you're plugging in the information that you used to calculate what your gains were from this HB3 passing. And it's what's used to determine what the calculation of that 30% should be. So the 2018-2019 school year funds need to be values that represent which ones you use to determine the compensation increases. It's not as simple as me telling you which summary of finance report to use, whether that's a near final value, but rather which numbers represent what you used to determine what these compensation increases are going to be, or were going to be. The 2019-2020 values represent the budgeted values that you use to determine what your compensation increases were going to be. All this is automated, so once you fill in these numbers, it's going to produce the 30% value that you'll see if you've opened up this report at the bottom. The next tab, this is where we're kind of breaking down the gains by the specific role ID, and the reason we're going with role ID is because it's just a normed way of calling out the different positions, as well as the descriptions of those positions. So I've listed out all the role IDs that we have in our PEIMS system so that it's clear which roles we are representing these gains from. Majority of people typically will use that 087 for the majority of their funds, which represent teachers. So the first one is the total base salary gain. So this is the total of your rate increases of base salary budgeted for each positions. The value is not the total amount paid to each position, but rather the amount budgeted for the rate increase for that position. So in other words, when you guys determine what that compensation increase was going to be for, say, your teachers, the value that we want here is the budgeted amount that you set aside essentially for these gains, because it may not necessarily be completely reflective of your actual amounts that you spent. So we want the budgeted amounts here rather than the actuals. The second column is total base supplemental income gain. So same concept here, but now we're talking about supplemental income, which could be a bilingual stipend. It could be a master's or doctorate's degree stipend that you give to your employees. It could be any of your UIL eligible stipends that you have in this position. So anything that's a supplemental income that's on top of their base salary. And again, it's gains. It may not necessarily reflect what the actual amounts are. Another thing to note on this, it's very important for any of these really, is the intent is for these to be permanent increases and not one-time increases. So if, an example would be if I'm paying my soccer coaches a $2,000 stipend in the 2018-2019 school year, and I decided that I'm going to increase that to a $2,500 stipend, that would be a $500 increase times however many head soccer coaches or soccer coaches that impacts. But if I were to revert back to that $2,000 stipend the next year, that's not really the intent of what this is supposed to capture. It's a permanent increase. And the last one is the benefits gains. This is where you're going to plug in any benefits increases that you're giving to your employees. So that could be base contribution increases to health insurance, life insurance, 401k, 403bs, supplemental insurance. Again, these are not one-time temporary increases. These are permanent increases that you are having moving forward. Third main tab here is the teacher salary schedule. Again, the purpose in this one is to capture you're showing differentiated compensation for your veteran teachers. So the main thing that we're trying to capture here is the number of teachers that you have at each level of experience and the total base salary that you have for year zero teachers. So maybe your year zero teachers get $48,000 and you have a total of 27 year zero teachers. You would plug in 27 for the number of teachers and 48,000 for the standard base salary. For the 2019-2020, you would then include how many year zero teachers you had in the 2019-2020 and include what that salary increase shifted to if you had an increase. So say you went from 48,000 to 51,000, you would plug in that 51,000 into that cell. Do not include base salaries that include any additional stipends. The purpose in that is that we want that captured in the supplemental incomes. Really what we're trying to boil down as far as increased compensation for your veteran teachers is that base salary. So we don't want to include any of those master's or doctorate level increases in this. This is supposed to be base salary without additional stipends. Lastly, this is probably the most important. Please be sure to fill out this entire table, leaving none of the green cells blank. This is important to kind of make sure that the formulas that I have built into this table for it to work and function properly. So even if you don't have, say, any teachers for year 7 or year 12 or whatever, just plug in a 0 for the number of teachers, but still provide the base salary that those teachers would have received if you happen to have any of them for that year. So the entire table needs to be filled out. We had a question last time about, well, what if my salary schedule ends at year 20? And if you've seen this table, it actually goes all the way down to year 40. So all you would need to do is basically extend that year 20 salary all the way through to year 40. And then again, include the number of teachers that you have at each of those experience levels. And we can talk about this in a little bit more detail here in a second. And lastly, the final report page. This is an automated page. There's nothing that you actually need to complete on this final tab. The only thing that you would need to do is just verify that the information is correct and accurate. It's another way for you to double check that the numbers that you entered ended up producing the values that you were expecting. And this is the report page, along with some of the other stuff that's found in this that we are going to be sending off to the ledge on you guys' behalf. Lastly here, if you don't already have this link, I imagine you do, because that's probably how you got access to this webinar to begin with. I strongly encourage you guys to use this link to fill the survey out and complete it. Our due date for this is October the 9th. That gives us and our program team time to process this information in order to get it to the ledge by the deadline. So now we're just going to kind of open it up to questions. Sarah, if you got any in the chat already.
Gotten a couple, but I think if it's a little bit easier if folks can chime in on here, as they tend to come in rather quickly in the chat. So feel free to speak up if you have a question.
Okay, so easy question that everybody asks. Is this presentation, oh, here it comes. Is this presentation out there somewhere we can get?
Yeah, I'm kind of periodically popping into the chat because I hear the ding in the back of my head here as people pop in. So I'm going to kind of throw it into the chat periodically in case people are hopping in and out. But like Sarah said at the beginning, we're going to also put this on the website as well for you guys to access at a later time as well.
Okay, I asked the question in the chat. When I put in just my teacher information, I met all the requirements. I spent 60% of my money. Do I have to fill out the rest of the information on all the other individual positions? Because that's going to take a lot more time.
That's a great question. You know, I guess that's a local discretionary call that you have for something like this. We want to make sure that you're presenting the information that you want to present to the ledge. So you have every right to issue whatever information you want to the ledge, because we're not going to manipulate this information in any way. So if you leave anything blank or you don't include anything, this is exactly what we're sending off to the ledge. So you may want to, yes, you may meet the requirement, but you may want to also express, hey, we not only met the requirements, we also went above and beyond the requirements in these other positions as well.
They're not going to give me a star to put on my website. I don't think I'm going to see it.
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to get any recognition from it. But when we tested this with districts, that was actually one of the things that we asked, and we kind of got a mixed response where it was like, hey, I really just want to report the information that meets the requirement. And then some districts were like, no, I want them to know exactly how much we spent so that they can see that we went above and beyond the requirement. So again, that's a local discretionary decision.
Well, that answers my question.
Awesome. Can you guys see Sarah, can y'all see my screen of the survey? Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure.
We had a question in the chat on the for the teacher salary schedule tab. Are we looking for the actual employee's salary, not the salary on the salary schedule?
No, what we are actually looking for is the salary on the salary schedule that you have for those employees. Because again, what we're trying to capture here, and we obviously know that there's so many different iterations of teacher salary schedules. So we're trying to just boil this down into its most basic form to kind of normalize that across the state. What is that base salary that you're giving to your incoming teachers here and the number of teachers that you had in each of those positions so that we can accurately discern whether or not you showed increased compensation for your veteran teachers.
We also had a question regarding whether the teacher salary schedule tab, although I think probably applies to all these tabs, are they just to take it as a snapshot in time, or is it for any teacher who works during the year?
Great question. Yeah, we had this question last time as far as, I mean, the salaries themselves, I don't think are dynamic. I haven't heard of many districts that their base salary schedule changes throughout the course of a year, where if it's like, hey, I got hired in October, I was going to receive this much, and oh, I got hired in November, so I'm going to receive this much. I haven't heard that yet. But as far as the number of teachers, yes, I do know that fluctuates throughout the year. So what we're telling districts is the values need to represent what represents your district the best. So whatever point in time that is, to find the stability of what is accurately reflective of what your district employs, that's the time. Most people, that's probably the October snapshot. By then, you've settled down from people leaving at the beginning of the year. You kind of have a sense of who's in your district at that point in time. But that may not be the case for every district.
Are we uploading this spreadsheet to the survey, or are we answering questions?
Yeah, so within the survey, you can actually download this Excel file. Like if you click that link, and in fact, I could do it real quick here. If you click that link, it'll allow you to open up the beginning of the survey. It kind of gives you high-level information, pretty much what we just covered, talking about the TAA, talking about the HB3 and 30 video series, links to those things. And then kind of down towards the bottom, you can actually download the Excel file itself. So you're not having to click through everything in order to get this file. It's here. You can also look for these FAQs if you have questions. Might want to read through those because they may be able to answer some of the questions that you have while you're filling this out. And then once you're ready, you've got that Excel file completed, you're ready to go, then you're going to click through all the information, provide your region, district name, etc., contact information, and then all it is an attach. So you're just going to attach the Excel file in this Qualtrics survey, and then that's what we use to send off to the ledge.
Okay.
I have a question. If you can hear me. I was told by our CFO to ask the following question. When he did Omar's template, he was projecting numbers when to come up with the amount that we would need to spend. The actual numbers were actually lower. Her state values went down, her local taxes were down, our ADA was down. So when we fill out this report, do we use the actual numbers that we did as a projection, or do we use the actual numbers? Sorry, the ones that were projected or the actual numbers?
To my knowledge, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm not sure if David or Leo is on this call to verify, but you should be using what numbers you use to determine what these compensation increases are, and not the actuals at the end, because you made those compensation increases prior to finding out what your actuals were, as far as my understanding. Leo, I don't know if you want to contribute.
Right, for purposes of this survey, that's my understanding as well. You want to plug in the data that you used to make the decisions a year ago, last summer.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. To calculate the gain, are you using the difference between the 18-19 contract, the employee's contract, and the 19-20? Is that how you calculate the gain?
It can be. It's not a perfect science of how to determine what these gains are. Essentially, in a nutshell, if I could boil it down, it's what money did you set aside in budget by these different positions for their compensation increases. Sometimes that's an actual like person-to-person rate increase. Like I gave $1,000 for every teacher, and I know exactly how many teachers I have in the district. sometimes some districts said, okay, I'm going to set aside $100,000. That's going to go towards base salary increases for my teachers. And they did it on a percentage base. So it's not always as simple as me saying it's this exact dollar amount with these exact people, but rather what is that amount that you use to budget and set aside per role? Because that aligns with this general info where you had an overall sense of what your gains were and budgeted. And now we want to say, okay, of those gains that you experienced and saw, what and where did you set aside that money based on these positions? So a safe place to go would be to actually look at your actuals and get a sense of where you were, but you really should have determined what those values were, like Leo said at the beginning of around last summer. What if our district? Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading a question in the chat. And this may actually be a really common thing. It's something to do with Excel. Sometimes the scripting that I have for this, it may require you to kind of double click sometimes to get the information to appear. So if your district doesn't show up, you may have to just click it an additional time. And sometimes you may need to scroll up or down on this drop down to select your district. But if you still are looking at that list and you're not able to see your district, please send us an email and we'll make sure that we get your name added in that list. Sorry, go ahead, whoever was hopping in with a question.
I was just going to ask, I don't know if you can hear me, but I was just going to ask, I know the FAQs are there, but as you've done the webinars, are you considering updating those FAQs because I've been trying to write really quickly, but
100%. Yeah, no, what we're doing is we actually are saving the chat. So not only are we saving the chat, we're actually also looking at our inbox, and we're kind of like getting a bunch of questions, and a lot of them are the same question, just asked in different ways. So after we're done with all these webinars, which would be today, we're going to compile a list and add that to our FAQs on the survey itself. So when you pull up the survey, there's already FAQs that we've developed, but we're also going to add new FAQs that have been asked since the webinars and our email inbox.
Okay, thank you so much.
Not a problem. I see a question in there, and this, I don't want to put Leo on the spot. I don't know if he's still in the call, but there was a question around the formula transition grant about my district's total revenue is down $5 million this year. There is no way that we can sustain the gains calculated on the Excel sheet.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm not going to go into each district's individual calculations, only other than to say that formula transition grant is considered a formula gain from House Bill 3, so it needs to be included. I did see a few further questions, and I was in the middle of typing response, but I'll go ahead and just verbalize it. The commissioner did request that formula transition grant be excluded from the calculation of the gains for the salary increases. However, the legislature and the LBB did not respond with either or a yes or no to that request. So because they were silent on the request, this current statutory framework stands. And then the last question I see for M&O taxes, is that only current taxes? That would be current and delinquent the way you would normally use M&O taxes for your template. Obviously, you would continue to exclude penalties and interest, but it's basically the tax collections that you plug in your template for your state funding, if that helps.
Any other questions?
Don't be shy. I'm ready for them. Hit me with them.
So I saw there is a question on the accountability being based on PEMS data and not the survey. And so this survey is actually the report that would be submitted to the legislature fulfilling this requirement in HB3, either by if you choose to do it through TEA or if you choose to do it on your own.
I see a question there. They are not sure if they have any Chapter 42 or 48 state aid. It's really looking at your M&O revenue, state and local revenue. So if you get any sort of foundation fund or available school fund, if you have any sort of M&O tax collections of your school district, if you pay any recapture, you would net that out. So anything on your summary finances, exclusive of Chapter 46, IFA or EDA or INS funding, aside from facilities funding, you would include in the comparison.
I'd like to go back to the gains by row ID.
Sure.
Did I understand you to say that we should be using the budgeted amount, not actual, trying to figure out the actual salaries?
Correct, because
Budget gain amount.
yeah, so sometimes it may align, or it may align relatively close. But what we're looking for here is what you set aside, what you budgeted for these gains in each of these specific roles.
Okay, thank you.
Got a question. When you talk about the total benefit gains, and you mentioned about if we increase the amount that we're contributing, like to health insurance, but do those benefit gains also include, of course, the added amount because you've increased salaries, now you're having to take out or pay more on the TRS and the workers' comp and all of that? Because your salary's increased, the percentage based on that is the benefit's going to increase. Do we include that difference as well?
That's a great question, Sarah. I don't know if we landed. We had that question asked last time as far as that TRS contribution, and I don't know if we landed on a specific answer. I don't recall. I have to go back and look.
I'll have to double check, but you should feel free to email the HB3 info inbox, and I can certainly follow up once I get confirmation.
Yeah, I think we were still kind of discussing with the finance team whether or not that, because you're basically kind of double counting almost in it. I mean, you're not, but you're kind of in a sense double counting when you're increasing here, and it's also increasing your contribution. So we're not 100% sure of the answers to that. That's a good question.
I think there's a question on the standard base salary amount and if to include the above state pay in that column, or only the state base pay.
For the salary schedule, you should be putting in what it is that you are paying. Some districts, they are just using the state minimum, the new state minimum salary schedule. But if you're above that, then you need to include the one that you're currently using.
Sorry, I have another question on this particular schedule. I think when I listened to y'all yesterday as well, when you looked at the base salary, like at year 5, and the individual that was in it in 18-19, we would follow a TASB pay study where we give them a percentage of the midpoint, right? So it's $500 for everybody or $1,000 for every teacher. But the board changed the decision on giving the increase, probably in light of, you know, the added monies, was to give a percentage of whatever they were earning the year before. So now the person that was at 5 going to 6, that represents the increase that they actually got for 1920. But if they compare, I think the way your schedule is set up, you're comparing year 5 in 1819 to year 5, 1920, and that's supposed to represent the increase, right?
Right. Well, so it's technically not supposed to include a step increase. That's why we're comparing a horizontal approach here, because that step increase would have occurred, even though you're probably shifting what that step increase is potentially from, you know, year 5 to year 6. But what we're looking for is, you know, if you're hired in a year 5 rate in 2018, 2019, comparing that to being hired on a year 5 for the 2019, 2020, because they were going to get that step increase going from a 5 to a 6 on your 18-19 salary schedule, regardless of the HB3 passing.
But see, that's where it comes into where TASB was the way they have us doing our salary schedule. They do it on the midpoint.
Right.
So they're all getting the $500 when they go to the next step. They're not really getting a step increase. They're in years they're getting it.
Gotcha.
Hey, they're getting just $500 flat. So is this something we keep in mind when we meet with our legislatures? If they
Well, I think you're really only going to need to have any concern really is as you fill the salary schedule out for whatever reason, based on what you just told me, if still you're not showing an increase, you know, because really that's what that's the reporting requirement is it's as simple as, you know, did you show differentiated compensation for your veteran teachers? So it's not so much saying like you needed to have this much of an increase. It's just simply, did you have an increase? Now, if you want to get into, you know, a debate with your ledge about, well, these values really represent, we gave even more than what we said, then that's completely fine. But really just to meet this reporting requirement, it's just to illustrate that you showed differentiated compensation for your veteran teachers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We got a request to see the general information slide again.
For state aid, do we need to include all state aid, including our EDA and IFA?
I think that's a Leo question.
EDA and IFA would not be included in this because those are in Chapter 46, not Chapter 42 or 48.
Thank you.
And probably one of the easiest questions you'll have all day. So on the gains by role ID, and I'll get with our HR department to see how we're going to differentiate all of that. I'm assuming if we, down towards the bottom when I talked about transportation and custodial, if we outsource those groups, then obviously we just need to put something in the green boxes, so we'll just put zeros.
Yeah, no, well, so I apologize if I wasn't clear. This is the only table that you need to completely fill out, the teacher salary schedule. The gains by role ID, you only need to fill in the ones that you have. So the majority of them will be, you know, 8-7, your teacher. This is probably where the majority of your money went. And then, you know, if you had those transportation, et cetera, employees. Just to be clear, though, the funds used for these positions are general funds, the 199. So if you used federal funds, that shouldn't be used as part of the calculations of your gains here, since that's not part of this from the general info. So
right, and we have 199 for transportation and custodial, but it's all outsourced.
Great.
But it's outsourced. They're not our employees.
Gotcha.
I have a quick question. Back to the, I guess, question the gentleman asked a little while ago. When I look at my salary schedule and I'm looking at like a year 18, when I compare 18-19 and 19-20, it shows I only gave a $1,700 raise. However, we gave those teachers a $2,800 raise.
I'm assuming that you're saying that you gave them a $2,800 raise because that's also including the step increase. So it's like you're giving them a raise from going from year 17 to 18. That's a step increase that's occurring in the 2018-19 school year. So if we were to flash back in time and HB3 never happened, I wish COVID never happened, but if HB3 never happened, then they would have still received that step increase. But
So
since HB3 happened, we want to see what was the impact in gains that's why we're doing a horizontal look.
Okay.
And again, the main thing is, did you show increased compensation for your veteran teacher, So comparing that, year 0 to year 5.
Our pay structure is pretty much set that it's a hiring scale. It's not so much a step raise. It's an actual hiring scale. And we've been really good to be able to give a raise every year. So I guess it wouldn't, just because it said 28, it may not be the same because it's a hiring scale. So just because the teacher sees 48,000 on there for next year, based on wherever we're at, it might have been 47.5 the way we're structured. It might have been less. In other words, they're not guaranteed that 18 next year if they're a 17 this year. Does that make sense?
I'm not 100% following you. I'm more of a visual person, to be honest. So if I saw your numbers, it would make a lot more sense to me. Right. But really what we're just trying to boil down, I know that there's a difference between new employees and returning employees and the salary schedules that coincide with that. Right. We're simply trying to boil it down to its simplest form. Here's your hiring schedule. You're hiring new employees. Are you showing differentiated compensation for your veteran teachers that you're hiring?
Right. But
that should happen on both.
We used Omar's template and it said you had to give $500,000. We pretty much, or I guess in our case, 30% was going to be. We took, all the veteran teachers and the $2,800 that they received times however many teachers you had in each category to come to that $500,000 number. So clearly doing it this way, we're not going to reach that number.
Let me be clear. This page is not used as part of the gains calculation. Those values that you have as far as the gains increases should be on this tab. The teacher salary schedule really has nothing to do with determining gains and compensation. It's just simply, did you show increased compensation for your veteran teachers?
Okay.
Not so much we're going to get down to the science of how much did you actually give to your veteran teachers, and then aligning that with your gains, etc. That's not the purpose in this on this tab.
So I guess now I understand what the other gentleman had said a while back when he looked at the gains by role ID, that if you look at the role ID for the 87, I think it's for the teachers, that if you show that gain that meets the requirement, then we don't need to fill out the other role IDs, because that's what the legislature is looking at, is did you give the 30% gain to your teachers?
Yeah, and that again, it goes back to the discussion I had with the gentleman earlier. It's are you wanting to paint the full picture, or are you just wanting to meet the requirements? Hey, I just want to show you that I met this 30% requirement. And like I said, when we tested this with districts, there were some that were on that boat. They were like, look, I only want to have to do, we issued out the 30% requirement. Here is where, we meet that by just looking at our teachers. I don't really care about these other roles. And then there's other districts that were like, no, I want them to know exactly how much I was giving because I went above and beyond that. And I want to make sure the ledge knows that. Now, are you going to get a gold star from the ledge? Probably not. But some districts want to be completely transparent and share where all that information went. So it 100% is a local decision.
Yeah, but it helps to understand your schedule. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think there was a question, Cody, regarding the gains by role ID tab.
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, I understand that dilemma as far as you differentiated those increases by the years of experience. But as a district, you knew how many teachers you potentially within reason that you're hiring within those different ranges to know how much money that you were budgeting and setting aside. So, let's say you were going to give $20,000 extra to your years 10 and beyond, but you only have just like a handful of 10 and beyond teachers. You budgeted that money rather than not knowing it all, and then you realize, oh, I actually have 1,000 of those teachers. I'm not going to have enough money to fund that. What we're looking for here is what money did you set aside in budget, not necessarily the granular level of knowing like the precise science behind where those gains came from. I hope that makes sense, Casey. I think that's Casey.
And wasn't there a link somewhere that came up with our 30%, or was that the piece, I'm trying to remember, a year back, or is that the piece that we got from when we used Omar's template?
I guess I'm not sure what you're referencing.
Just to go back and I'm answering a question from our HR department while I'm on the Zoom here, because she's trying to go back and find where the amount was on that 30% requirement. But my thought back was it was kind of computed back through from using Omar's template.
Yeah, and some did. Some used that template to determine. Some used other avenues to figure out what that gains is. So we're just trying to recapture that here. And the reason I built it out this way is to align with the PowerPoint that was put together when
okay.
this was issued out.
You've got it. The general info tab is going to compute a number for us as well.
100%.
Yep, I see it there now. Okay, very cool. Thanks.
Yep. Great question. I saw here, I was not here when they determined the amount. How do I know which one to go back to? That's a tough question. I would hope that you have somebody that you can get a hold of and contact at your LEA that can help you find out what those values are. You might have to do a little bit of like reverse engineering and figure out, okay, well, what money did I set aside? And if you knew like, okay, we gave 50% or 48%, in gains, maybe do a little reverse engineering to kind of calculate, and determine which values you used when you made that determination. But yes, I understand that you might be in a tough place.
Cody, a quick question. The survey, you can save it and come back to it. Is that correct? You don't need to do it all in one sitting.
Yeah, I mean, if you're referring to the Excel document, absolutely. This is a downloaded local file that you can update at your own pace. And then as far as the survey, you just, once you're done completing this Excel document, the survey is really just a means of uploading it to a server for us to access instead of just us getting bombarded with a bunch of emails. It's just all stored nice and neat in Qualtrics for us. Great question on by Cindy there. She's talking about how they didn't budget separately for just the 30%. So what we're not necessarily looking for just the 30% what you budgeted. If you went above and beyond that 30%, that's okay to fill that in here, and it's going to be reflective in the final report page that you're going to not only meet that requirement, you went above and beyond meeting the requirement. So we don't expect you to just boil down to that 30%, if you went above and beyond the 30%, you can go ahead and include all the values. And I would actually encourage you here, because that actually paints a better picture to the ledge. Like, hey, your requirement was 30%, but we actually went up to 40, 50%.
I was just replying to her because she's like,
And then I saw somebody, and it's good that you asked that question, because we may have that case. It just depends on how you got the survey link. It said when I click on the link to complete the survey, it says that I have already completed it. That's a common thing that happens. The emails that we sent to the superintendents were actually unique to those superintendents, because it actually helps us keep track in Qualtrics of which districts have submitted the information, so that we can send out reminders. The link that I have in the PowerPoint is one that anybody can use, and anybody can use as many times as you want. So I would encourage you to use the link in the PowerPoint, and it's also posted on our website as well for you to access the link there. What are the financial implications if we do not meet the % requirements? Great question. I don't know the answer to that. It's not explicit in statute, so I don't have a definitive answer. Sarah, I don't know if you want to. Yeah,
I can share a response. So what we've been telling districts, if they get through 1920 and go back and look and see that they did not meet the minimum 30% requirement, it's in Chapter 48, and so the agency is treating that as any other spending requirement. So in which case, we generally tell the districts, if they fail to meet a spending requirement in any given year, that they make up that amount of the shortfall in the subsequent year. And so in this case, if those an amount that they fell short, they need to make that right in FY21. And then not only that, but then adjust the compensation in FY21 to make sure that, because it was a recurring compensation requirement to begin with, that they make the employees whole for the shortfall in 1920, and then correct the shortfall in the current compensation in FY21. And so that's what we've been telling districts that have asked that question throughout the year.
Awesome. I see a question in the chat that says, on the gains role ID, if we gave a 5% across non-teaching staff, do we need to break the dollar amount down by ID? And yes, mainly because obviously you're probably not going to employ all, 80 of these role IDs that are listed here. So we need to know specifically which of these roles. And then it's also going to be dependent upon, the number of employees that you have in each of those roles to know what you've budgeted. Say you have art therapists, you're not going to have the same number of art therapists as you do assistant principals in your district. So there's going to be different amounts. Even though you did a 5% increase across the staff, there's still going to be differentiation by the specific roles. So you do need to fill those in by those specific roles. And then another question, what PEIMS report is best to use for the gains by role ID? I don't know if PEIMS is the best answer to this. It is a good place to start. We did test this out in PEIMS. The unfortunate thing about PEIMS is that it's a snapshot date. So it really depends on if that snapshot date is reflective of when you, or the values that you use to determine these compensation increases. If the PEIMS snapshot report is not reflective, then those may misrepresent what you actually spent. But it definitely is a good place to start. If you don't have anywhere to start, I would encourage you, yes, take a look at that October PEIMS snapshot in the 2018-2019 and the 2019-2020, and at least it gives you a starting point of where in the ballpark you should be. But again, it may not be completely reflective of what your district actually budgeted by these positions.
Any other questions in our last few remaining minutes?
Where will this recording be on the TEA website?
We're hoping to put it on the HB3 page.
Thank you.
I'm dropping in the PowerPoint again for anybody that kind of joined late and didn't get access to it. If you want to download, it's there in the chat.
And I
And
think
yes, yeah, the response that just showed up there by Rebecca is true. It depends on what systems and software you guys have access to, but there are ways to calculate these values using those pieces of software. Somebody had a question. I very rudely interrupted them. I apologize.
Oh, I think my question was just that, but I think I saw it as I scrolled back up, the email address for questions.
Yeah, and Sarah, you can
Yep,
probably
I can
pop
put
that
that
back
in
in.
again.
Yeah, they mean.
Yeah.
Hopefully that doesn't have a quota limit on it, because I'm sure you get a lot of it.
We've gotten a lot. We've gotten a
Well,
lot lately. So
Quota is one person manning it, so please be patient.
yeah,
Perfect.
Sarah's a one woman team and responding to those emails for sure.
Any other questions? Not, we can give you back a few more minutes.
Yeah, so feel free, guys, if you still have questions, you're going through the survey and you're going through the report and you have more questions, please reach out to us at that HB3info email address there that Sarah just posted in the chat. And we'll be happy to help you guys answer those questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was informative.
Awesome, thanks.